The morning air inside St. Helena Medical Center was thick with tension and routine chaos, the kind of organized urgency that only hospitals knew. Nurses bustled past with clipboards, the intercom crackled with calls for doctors, and the steady rhythm of machines hummed through the sterile corridors. Among them was Clara Bennett, a young nurse who had long stopped noticing the fatigue in her bones. Her shift had started before sunrise, and by 10 a.m., she had already helped deliver a newborn, comforted a grieving family, and changed dressings for 3 patients. Yet despite the exhaustion, her smile never faltered. She always told herself that hope was contagious, and she wanted to spread it wherever she went. Clara wasn't from wealth or privilege. She'd grown up in a small town, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. Watching her mother struggle had shaped Clara into someone selfless, grounded, and fiercely compassionate. She became a nurse not because of ambition, but because of a promise she once made: "One day, I'll save lives, Mom. So you can rest." That promise echoed in her mind the day she met the unknown patient. It started with an announcement over the intercom. Greater than, code blue, room 304. Code blue. Clara rushed down the hall, her heart pounding. Inside the room, a man lay motionless, pale as the sheets beneath him. The doctors were already there, shouting numbers, adjusting IVs, and working to stabilize his failing kidneys. She grabbed the chart on instinct. Greater than name, Daniel Lawson. Age, 34. Condition, end-stage renal failure. Blood type, O negative. There was a long silence after the monitor beeped steadily again. The man's life had been pulled back from the edge, for now. Clara stood beside his bed, staring at the face of the stranger she had just helped save. He looked peaceful, almost fragile, his skin pale but his features strong, the kind of face that belonged to someone who had once carried the weight of the world but was now too tired to keep fighting. Dr. Harris, the lead surgeon, sighed beside her. "He's been waiting months for a donor," he said quietly. "No family, no visitors. It's a miracle he's even lasted this long." Clara frowned. "No family, no one at all, none that we know of," the doctor replied. "He's refused media, refused to list any contacts. He said he wanted to fight this alone." "Fight this alone," she repeated softly, her heart tightening. She couldn't imagine facing something like that with no one by her side. As the day went on, she found herself checking in on him more often, adjusting his blankets, making sure his IV was flowing smoothly, writing small notes of encouragement on the whiteboard near his bed. Even though he was unconscious, she spoke to him sometimes while changing his saline drip. "Don't give up, okay?" she whispered one night. "You're still here for a reason." She didn't know why she said it. Maybe it was the nurse in her, maybe something deeper. The following morning, during her short break, Clara went to the staff lounge. A few nurses chatted over coffee, but she sat quietly, staring at Daniel's medical file in her hands. His lab results were worsening. The words, "critical deterioration," glared up at her in bold red letters. If he didn't get a transplant soon, he would die. She bit her lip, thinking. She knew her own blood type, O negative. One of the rarest. A chill went through her. "No, Clara, don't even think about it," she told herself. "You can't just volunteer for something like that." But the thought refused to leave. It followed her through the rest of her shift, through every hallway, every chart she filled out. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept seeing his pale, still face, the way his hand had slightly twitched when she spoke to him, as if some part of him was still fighting. By dawn, she made her decision. She went to the hospital lab before her next shift and asked for a test. The technician, surprised, asked, "You're volunteering as a donor?" Clara nodded. "I just want to see if I'm a match." She tried not to think about what it meant. Hours later, when the results came back, the technician looked at her with wide eyes. "Clara, you're a perfect match." Her breath caught. She felt dizzy, overwhelmed. A strange mix of fear and peace washed over her. She sat down and whispered, "Then I'll do it." "Are you sure?" the technician asked softly. "You don't even know who he is." Clara gave a small, tired smile. "I don't need to. If I can save one person, just one, that's enough for me." When Dr. Harris heard, he was stunned. "Clara, this isn't a small thing," he warned. "You'll be risking your own health. You might never meet him. He might not even." "I understand," she said gently, cutting him off. "But I've seen too many people die waiting." If I can stop that from happening again, then I have to try. For a long moment, the doctor just looked at her, at the determination in her eyes. Then he nodded slowly. All right, Clara, we'll schedule it. That night, as she sat by Daniel's bedside for what she thought might be the last time before the surgery, she reached for his hand and whispered, I don't know who you are. But I hope, when you wake up, you live a life worth saving. She didn't know then that the man she was speaking to, the one whose life she was about to risk her own for, wasn't just another patient. He was Daniel Lawson, the reclusive CEO of Lawson Enterprises, one of the richest men in the country. A man used to power, control, and solitude. And by morning, the nurse who had nothing would give everything, to save the man who had everything. The soft hum of machines was the first sound that Daniel Lawson heard when he opened his eyes. A faint antiseptic smell lingered in the air, mixed with something strangely comforting, warmth, safety, and light. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. The ceiling above him was white and blurry, and his body felt heavy, as if made of stone. When he tried to move, a dull ache spread through his abdomen, sharp enough to make him wince. A nurse rushed to his side. Mr. Lawson, don't move too quickly, she said gently. You're recovering from major surgery. His throat was dry. Surgery, he croaked. The nurse smiled softly. You received a kidney transplant. It was successful. Her words sank in slowly. Transplant. Successful. Alive. He blinked several times, trying to process it. For months, he had lived in a fog of pain and uncertainty, tethered to machines that reminded him how fragile even the richest man could be. Now, he was breathing freely again. He turned his head toward the window. Morning sunlight spilled across the floor, and for the first time in years, it felt like more than just light, it felt like life. He whispered hoarsely, whose kidney? The nurse hesitated. It was an anonymous donor. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. Anonymous. Yes, she said softly. They chose to remain unidentified. All we can tell you is that it was a hospital staff member. A nurse. Something inside him shifted. A nurse. Someone who had seen his file, his condition, and decided to give up a piece of themselves for him, a stranger. He swallowed hard. Can I meet them? I'm afraid that's not allowed, she replied, lowering her voice. The donor specifically asked for privacy. They didn't want recognition or reward. That stunned him. In his world, the world of contracts, power plays, and greed, no one did something without expecting something in return. And yet, someone had saved his life simply because they could. Over the next few days, Daniel remained in recovery, his body growing stronger though his mind stayed restless. The hospital staff were cautious around him, polite but distant. He didn't mind, he preferred solitude. But at night, when the halls went quiet, he found himself staring at the IV tubes and wondering why. Why would anyone, especially a nurse, probably overworked, underpaid, invisible to the world, risk their life for him? He began asking questions. Who was assigned to my care before the surgery? He asked his doctor one morning. Several nurses rotated shifts, the doctor replied. It's difficult to pinpoint who initiated the donor request. It came through official channels. Daniel's brow furrowed. Official channels don't move that fast. The doctor smiled faintly. Perhaps not, unless the person was determined. Determined. That word echoed in his mind. He imagined the person, someone who had read his file, saw his test results, and decided this man deserves to live. But why him? By the end of the week, Daniel insisted on walking. His assistants begged him to return home to his penthouse, but he refused. Not until I know who did this, he said firmly. One night, while wandering the quiet halls, he paused near the nurses' lounge. Laughter and chatter floated from inside. Through the glass window, he could see a few nurses sharing coffee, their uniforms rumpled, their faces tired but kind. He studied each of them. They all looked so ordinary. None fit the image of the kind of hero he imagined, but maybe that was the point. As he turned to leave, he overheard a whisper. Did you hear about Nurse Bennett? She's still in recovery after the transplant. Daniel froze. Another nurse replied softly, she shouldn't have done it, poor thing. She barely had enough saved for her own rent, and she still gave part of herself for a stranger. He felt his chest tighten. Bennett. The name struck him with a force that made his breath hitch. The next morning, Daniel called in a quiet favor. A discreet phone call to the hospital board, a word to the HR department, and soon, he had a file in his hand. Greater than name, Clara Bennett. Position, registered nurse, transplant unit. Age, 26. Status, on medical leave post-donation surgery. He stared at her photo, a simple headshot. Her hair tied back, her smile modest but real. She looked ordinary, and yet, she had done something extraordinary. The powerful CEO, who had once dismissed emotions as weaknesses, now sat in silence, staring at the picture of the woman who had given him a second chance at life. He didn't know what to feel: gratitude, guilt, awe, perhaps all of it at once. He whispered, almost to himself, "You gave me your life. And I don't even know you." 2 weeks later, Daniel was discharged. But before heading home, he made a quiet stop, the nurse's recovery ward. Through the half-open door, he saw her. Clara was sitting upright in bed, sunlight spilling across her face. She was pale but smiling faintly as she read from a small book. A vase of wildflowers sat on her bedside table, probably from another patient she had once helped. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. He simply watched the woman who had unknowingly saved him, her presence filling the sterile room with warmth. He wanted to walk in, to thank her, to tell her who he was. But something held him back. She had done it out of kindness, not for recognition. To reveal himself now felt selfish, as if he'd turn her pure act into another transaction. So he quietly left, leaving behind a single white rose on her bedside table, with a note that read, "Greater than, for the heart that saves without reason, thank you for mine." Clara found it an hour later, smiling through tears. She didn't know who had left it, and maybe that was how it was meant to be. But fate wasn't finished with them yet. Months passed since the day Daniel Lawson walked out of the hospital with a white rose left behind on Clara Bennett's bedside table. To everyone around him, his board members, his assistants, the media, he was a man reborn. The once cold and distant CEO of Lawson Dynamics had returned to his company with an energy that surprised even his closest advisors. He smiled more often. He walked to meetings instead of being driven. He personally greeted employees by name. Yet, behind every act of kindness, there lingered one silent thought: her. Clara Bennett, the nurse who gave up part of herself to save a stranger's life. He had read her file 100 times, memorized her face from that single ID photo, and every night before he slept, her quiet courage haunted him. It wasn't obsession, it was gratitude turned into purpose. He wanted to repay her, not with money, but with something far more meaningful: a chance to live the life she deserved. Clara's life, however, had not improved after the transplant. While her body healed slowly, the bills did not. Her medical leave meant no pay, and even when she returned to work, the hospital had assigned her to light duties, less hours, less pay. Her small apartment was cramped and cold, and every night she sat by the window, wondering if the man who received her kidney was doing well. Sometimes, she smiled at the thought of him, a stranger breathing because of her. She didn't regret her decision, but a quiet ache filled her heart. It wasn't about recognition or money, it was the simple wish to know that her sacrifice had meant something. One rainy evening, Clara walked home from another long shift, her umbrella barely holding against the wind. The city lights shimmered in puddles, reflecting a world that never stopped moving. She was crossing the street when a black car slowed beside her, sleek, quiet, out of place in her rundown neighborhood. The window rolled down. "Miss Bennett." Clara froze, clutching her umbrella. The voice was deep, calm, familiar somehow. "Yes," she said cautiously. The man who stepped out was tall, wearing a dark coat that shielded him from the rain. His face was strong, but his eyes, those eyes, carried something disarmingly human. "I'm sorry for approaching you like this," he said. "My name is Daniel Lawson." Her breath caught. "Lawson, as in..." "Yes," he interrupted softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "The kidney recipient." For a heartbeat, the world around them vanished, only the sound of rain filled the silence. She blinked in disbelief. You found me." "I had to," he said. "You gave me my life back. The least I could do was thank you in person." Clara stood still, unsure how to respond. The man she had saved, the billionaire who had once been a headline, a face on magazine covers, was standing before her, drenched in rain, speaking with genuine humility. "I told the hospital to keep it anonymous," she murmured. "You weren't supposed to know." "I know," he said quietly. "But I needed to." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, water-sealed envelope. "This isn't payment," he said. It's an opportunity. You've spent your life saving others. Now, let someone save you for once. Clara hesitated, then took it. Inside was a letter, and a contract offer for a full scholarship to complete her medical degree, all expenses covered by the Lawson Foundation. Her hands trembled. I can't accept this. Yes, you can, Daniel said, his tone firm but kind. You gave me a future. Let me give you yours. Tears welled in her eyes. For a moment, she forgot the rain, the exhaustion, the cold. It was just two souls, one who had given, one who had received, standing in quiet understanding. Over the next months, Clara's life transformed. With Daniel's sponsorship, she began her studies to become a doctor, working part-time at the same hospital where their story had begun. Daniel, though always busy, visited often, under the pretense of donating to the hospital but secretly just to see her progress. Their friendship grew naturally. He admired her simplicity, she admired his transformation. Where once he had measured life in profits, now he measured it in people. One evening, during a charity gala hosted by the Lawson Foundation, Daniel found Clara standing by the balcony, watching the city skyline. He approached quietly. You don't like crowds, do you? She smiled softly. Not when they're this fancy. I feel out of place. You shouldn't, he said, stepping beside her. You belong everywhere you bring light. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights. You've changed, Mr. Lawson. He smiled faintly. No, Clara, you changed me. A long pause settled between them, warm, inspoken, honest. I used to believe that power came from money, he continued. But now I know, real power is in kindness. And you taught me that. She laughed lightly, brushing a tear away. And I thought I was just doing my job. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a white rose, pressed and preserved in glass. I never thanked you properly, he said. This was yours, wasn't it? Clara gasped. The rose, from my bedside. He nodded. I left it that day. I wanted you to know that someone out there was living, because of you. Her lips trembled. I always hoped it meant something. Daniel smiled. It meant everything. As the music swelled inside and the city glimmered below, Clara and Daniel stood side by side, no longer donor and recipient, but two souls bound by something deeper than fate. It wasn't love at first sight. It was love built on gratitude, courage, and the quiet miracle of one human heart saving another. And somewhere in the silence of that moment, Daniel whispered, not to her, but to himself. Greater than, the best business I ever made, was learning how to live again.